1:30. Oh my god, why are you doing that to me? Ah! Went too far. Hi everybody. Welcome to Latin Madoka Latin 4, the Voyage Homura. I'm Frobor, aka Jed Blue. I'm the author of the book The Very Soil, a critical study of Puella Madoka Magica, which just came out a little over a week ago and I'm really excited about. No, unfortunately. But you can get it off of like Amazon and Barnes & Noble and stuff. So, out of curiosity, have any of you been to the previous years where I've done versions of this panel? Okay, so for just so all of you know, all of the AMVs are old, all of the rest of the content this year is new. For those of you who have not, basically what I do here is analytical stuff regarding Madoka Magica, looking into characters, looking into references to other works, getting a little bit into literary theory, and just trying to unpack some of this show which has eaten my brain. Spoiler warnings. I've got this split up into segments and I've dropped AMVs between the segments. The first segment is on the assumption that you've seen the entire series and will spoil the entire series. The second segment is on the some of the manga spin-offs, and I am not going to refrain from spoiling those either. Anyway, you're not really missing anything. And then the last segment is going to have a lot of Rebellion spoilers. So, because holy crap, that movie. Just to give you guys an idea, for my book, I had to watch that movie over 30 times. And I still love it.
How are you alive? How have you not greased out by now?
I think so. So anyway, why don't we just dive in? Yes, the AMVs are to give you time to do that. Oops. No! Sorry, this is a brand new computer because my laptop died while I was working on this panel. And I'm still learning to use it. This panel killed my laptop. Yeah. And so I'm still learning this thing. All right. So I'm going to jump in with something that I have not seen a lot of talk about in regards to Madoka Magica, and that is its relationship to Kamishibai. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Japanese is not my best language. And what Kamishibai is paper theater. What this is a form of entertainment that was popular in the early 20th century up until about the 1950s, 60s is where it started to die off. And it was very similar to kind of European itinerant puppet shows, that kind of thing. What would happen is you would get men, it was almost always men, who would travel around the countryside with a cart or a bicycle with this wooden stage mounted on the back that they could unfold. And built into that was this scroll of paper with scenes painted on it. And they would tell a story and scroll the paper and show the different scenes as they went. It was very common, it was very popular. It was a form of cheap novel entertainment in a country that was a little low on both money and sources of entertainment for most of the populace for most of the early 20th century. Initially, they told like traditional stories, like myths, legends, folk tales, versions of famous novels, that kind of thing. But as time went on, they started inventing their own stories, their own characters. Pictured here, for example, is one of the most popular, a superhero named Golden Bat. And as you can kind of tell by looking at it, this was a huge influence on early manga. You basically take Kamishibai, combine it with Karl Barks's Donald Duck comics, and you get Osamu Tezuka. That's like basically his two main influences. So it really was a huge influence on early manga and thus in turn early anime. Now, especially in the kinds of stories told, they were very similar character types and plot lines to what we now think of as shonen. Now, how is this particularly relevant to Madoka itself? Well, Madoka, the show, has quite a lot of paper in it, right from the start. I'm just going to have to use the mouse pointer for this. The keyboard controls don't work for some reason. We can say in a very real sense that Madoka is framed in paper. The very first shot of Madoka is paper curtains and doilies rising and bringing us into this world, a reference to those portable theaters that Kamishibai stories were told in. Now, I'm going to get a little bit into the theory here. There's many different ways of defining art. My own preferred definition is what's called the institutionalist definition, which is that art is an artifact presented by an artist and accepted by an art world public. What that means, art is an artifact. It is a made thing. It is presented by an artist. It is sent out into the world by someone whose social role is the creation of art. And it is accepted by an art world public. That is, there's a group of people who know what art is and look at that and say that is art. There are some subtle differences, but basically it comes down to art is that which we call art. And what that means is that in many ways the frame defines the art. The example I like to give is that if you go into a museum and start spray painting images on the walls, you will be arrested and kicked out. But if you put a frame around it first, it's art. And the frame around Madoka is papercraft. It's the curtain of a Kamishibai theater. Where else do we see papercraft in the series? Witches' barriers are full of it. There's paper everywhere. Almost, as the show goes on, we start seeing other materials being used to make the witches' barriers, but the first couple are very heavily using papercraft. Papercraft shows up for the witch equivalents in the movies. It's a very heavy use of it that ties them very closely together. So we've got papercraft connected to the roots of anime itself, and with witches. And I think we can read this as a suggestion that witches are in some way tied to the roots of Madoka Magica. Which brings us, eventually, to the genre of magical girls and of witches. And back to an old TV show, Bewitched. How many people have seen, the original TV show? Okay. It was on reruns constantly when I was a kid. If you have not seen it, Bewitched is a sitcom from the early 1960s, I think. It might be 1950s, but I think it's 60s. About a witch named Samantha who is married to an ordinary guy and is trying to lead an ordinary life. But she has these extraordinary magical powers that can do basically anything. And the two main drivers of the plot are either Samantha's magic causes a disaster that must be dealt with, or they desperately have to hide the fact that Samantha is a witch because being different is bad, because this is a 1960s sitcom. She is a very traditionally feminine wife and mother. You know, the classic old sitcom thing of, you know, vacuuming in heels and pearls. That's Samantha. But she also has this fantastical, enormous power to her. So the result is that this enormous power is tightly constrained within the social role of a 1960s housewife. For whatever reason, this was a huge hit with Japanese girls when it was brought over to Japan later in the 60s. Huge hit, tremendously popular. And this then in turn led to the creation of an entire genre about girls with enormous magical power tightly constrained within the social roles of being an ordinary girl. And that's the magical girl genre in a nutshell. Although there's some manga examples preceding it, the first magical girl anime was completely straightforward about it. Sally's a witch. The title literally translates to Sally the Witch. She is straightforwardly a witch, but she's also this sweet, cute, harmless little elementary school girl. Enormous power, completely safe for the people around her. Not threatening at all, despite having this great power. Which is really interesting when we consider what witches are traditionally. Because traditionally, witches represent a fear of women having power. In the West, a lot of stories about witches have them as an inversion of femininity. The presence of a witch causes milk to sour, it causes livestock to miscarry, it causes not only disasters, but specifically disasters that are in some way associated with motherhood and the destruction of motherhood. Oftentimes the witch has a pact with an evil being, usually in the West, Satan. Oftentimes she is an outsider. She doesn't live in the village, she lives out in the woods, up on the mountain, somewhere dangerous, from which she then enters our safe world and causes disaster because we're scared of the idea of a woman having power. Japan has examples of stories like this, but they're usually not witches. They're usually yokai. Onibaba, the mountain hag, is one example. It's a scary old woman who lives on a mountain and eats you. The kitsune, while frequently adorable, is nonetheless powerful and dangerous. And there are stories of, a man marrying a beautiful woman and food keeps disappearing and it turns out she's actually a kitsune robbing him blind. And there's very similar stories in the West about a man who marries a woman and then he gets really sick and it turns out she's actually a witch who takes the form of a cat and is harming him. And the Yuki-onna, the snow woman, is yet another example. She is this woman who is, again, very beautiful and alluring, but she will suck the heat out of you and kill you. So she tries to seduce men and steal their warmth. Again, very similar to stories, although the succubus is the obvious Western example, there's also stories of witches who, again, marry a man and make him sick because they're sucking out his life force. And it all ties to this fear of women's power, women's sexuality. It's found threatening and menacing because yay sexism. So there's a phrase Kyubei says, one of my favorite moments in the entire series, I think it's one of everyone's favorite moments in the entire series, where it's the big reveal. People who will become women are called girls, so you who will become witches are called magical girls. This is an excellent fantasy way of expressing an idea introduced by a man named Saito, who wrote a book called Beautiful Fighting Girls in 99 or 2000. And you can get an English translation. It's very good. I very highly recommend it if you're interested in stuff like magical girls, Bashoujo series, that kind of thing. And the argument he makes is that while magical girls started as being a genre for girls, by 2000, they're mostly being made for basement-dwelling otaku male nerds. And said basement-dwelling otaku male nerds have a really complicated relationship with sexuality that consists of being simultaneously drawn to it and frightened by it. And so to them, the attraction of the magical girl is the transformation. Not because she gets naked during it, though that helps, but because it's an accelerated maturation in Saito's argument. She goes from being a sweet, innocent, harmless girl to being powerful, adult. You know, the costumes very often are not things a little girl would wear. And therefore okay to sexualize, but still retaining the sweet, innocent little girl that is therefore not frightening to your basement-dwelling otaku nerd. The power of a witch, the social role of a girl. What we end up? So let's talk about one particular witch. This is my favorite witch. I know everybody loves Charlotte, and Charlotte is awesome. There's a reason she's on the back cover of my book, because she's great and she looks great. But the witch who actually gets the most attention in the show, the one who gets the most screen time, who gets talked about the most, who gets built up to the most, is Walpurgisnacht. And Walpurgisnacht is very interesting in witch lore because, of course, Walpurgisnacht is a German holiday. It's St. Walpurgis's Eve. It would be the English translation of Walpurgisnacht. And according to German legend, Walpurgisnacht, which is right before May Day, is it April 31st or May 1st? I can't remember. But on that night, witches gather on Mount Brocken and have a massive party. And it is absolutely spectacularly dangerous to go anywhere near a massive witch party because witches' idea of fun is not safe for other people. If you've ever seen the musical piece Night on Bald Mountain and the Fantasia segment based on it is a depiction of Walpurgisnacht. The mountain shown is Mount Brocken. One of Madoka's witch forms is also an image of Mount Brocken in one of the timelines. The one where she becomes a mountain. So, what is Walpurgisnacht in this show? Well, there's kind of two halves to Walpurgisnacht connected by a shaft. The first one, which is on the bottom in this image, is the Harlequin. And what a Harlequin is a figure from the old Commedia dell'arte, which is, again, a Western form of theater. It's an early form of theater that's ancestral to a lot of modern theater. And what went on in the Commedia dell'arte was you had kind of mostly fixed character roles that would be inserted into different stories. So kind of like how in a modern magical girl show you have, or a moe show, you have fixed character roles. You have, you know, the yandere, the tsundere, the so on and so forth. It was kind of a similar idea that it was character roles into which you would then build a story with kind of these fixed roles, and they would have like the same costume from play to play, so you'd immediately know who was what character. And so the Harlequin is one of the most famous and distinctive ones. It also heavily influenced modern clowns, which is why it looks like a clown. And the role of the Harlequin was to be a trickster. The Harlequin would mock the story and the other characters. The Harlequin was very often in like a tragic romance. The Harlequin would be both the second male and have his own like side peasant romance, while the high nobles had their tragic doomed romance. You'd have this other story thread where the Harlequin and a peasant girl had a romance, and it would be a way of kind of making fun of the overblown tragedy, and you'd have this nonsense going on with the Harlequin. So here comes Walpurgisnacht making fun of the doomed romance of Madoka and Homura. And you've got this then other half to her, this giant gear, which, being a piece of clockwork, is immediately a connection to Homura, because there's all these clock and gear images surrounding Homura. In particular, it's a reflection of her buckler, which she uses to turn back time after every time she fights Walpurgisnacht. But it's also, with all the Buddhist themes going on, a giant wheel that has a connection to time immediately calls to mind the Wheel of Fate and the concept of Dharma, the notion, which I am certain I'm mispronouncing. And what that is the concept that not only do you have a destiny, you have a repetitive destiny. You are going to live through all the mistakes you made last life, all of the burdens you took upon yourself, all of the karma you built up. This life, you will repeat it all again and work through the exact same karma, and then all of them, you'll do it again and again and again and again until you finally figure out a way out of the maze. Again, sound familiar? And that's, sorry. So, in a very real sense, the witches represent the future of the magical girls, and they represent their past. There's a cycle going on, because all magical girls began as Sally the Witch, and all magical girls in Madoka end as Walpurgisnacht, the big witch party. And we'll just keep looping around until someone figures out a way out. Now, witches are all about this fear of feminine power. Magical girls, and in particular Moe-influenced magical girls, are all about this fear of feminine power and constraining it so that we can enjoy it while also being safe from it. And Kyubey is creating this repetitive cycle of magical girl witch, magical girl witch, magical girl witch. Kyubey is a Moe fan. He derives energy from the suffering of magical girls. He also profits off of it, so he's a Moe creator too. In my book, I also talk about Moe as a self-insert for Orobochi. It works surprisingly well. I think the dude may have some issues. So, how do we get out of this trap of the cycle of the Moe magical girl? Well, basically, we have to destroy the genre to save it. And that's what Madoka is trying to do. I will talk about this more later tonight at my panel about anime and the apocalypse. But in a very real sense, in fiction, the apocalypse is revolution seen from above. The end, it's revolution from the point of view of people who benefited from the old system. From the point of view of the people who didn't, apocalypse is awesome because this crap world is finally getting destroyed and we can build something new. See the motivations of every 90s anime villain ever. And that's exactly what Madoka is doing. Madoka is a 90s anime villain who succeeds. She looks around at the world that is full of suffering and despair and pain, destroys it, and builds something new. And at the same time, Madoka the show is destroying the genre to create a new one. Madoka's ambition is to do to magical girls what Evangelion did to super robots. To say, okay, we've kind of settled into a rut of doing everything exactly the same way in every show. Let's ruin that. Let's make it so that you can't ever have magical girls fighting the monster again without somebody remembering Charlotte and Bonnie. And so now you're forced to break out of that rut. Now we're going to have to do something different. If the history of super robots is anything to go by, what that means is we will get 7,000 exact copies of Madoka. And then everyone will start hating Madoka. Now the question is, though, what is this new world that Madoka creates? Is it better or not? Now, from the point of view of the characters, yes, it's better for most of them. But from this external view that we're taking, from this view where she's destroying this fear of feminine power so that it can run free, is it an improvement? And honestly, yes and no. Because there's two different ways you can look at what Madoka did. You can look what Madoka did, and this is the way Madoka puts it, as saying, feminine power is now free. You can now be a magical girl and wield all this power without having to worry that the world will turn to you and say, you are a monster. You can do it without being forced to become a witch. Which is great. Except the other way to look at it is that the magical girl is constrained tightly into a particular social role. She's, the good little girl. And the witch was breaking free of that. The witch was the revolution. But it looks like apocalypse to us because we're benefiting from the old system. The witch was trying to set the magical girl free from the suffering imposed upon her by society. AKA Kyubey. So the other way to look at it is that no, what Madoka has actually done, despite the best of intentions, is closed off all avenues of escape. Which is it? It depends on how you look at it. Because Madoka is great, and most of it works that way. There are some things we know, however. And here we have my little slide on why most of the manga spin-offs aren't very good. Don't worry, those of you who have not read the manga, I'm not going to start spoiling them yet. I'm just going to point out that there are three kind of core tenets that the series establishes as essentially unbreakable. You cannot call something a Madoka a spin-off unless you follow these three rules. One, magical girls are and always have been witches. They began as witches, they will become witches. In between, they are witches pretending to be safe. Two, Kyubey's system is ridiculously exploitative of them. He is awful, his system is awful. Being a magical girl sucks until Madoka comes in and fixes things. It's not that much better after, but at least it's not as bad. And the third is that Kyubey's system is indestructible. Kyubey's system cannot be beaten. Kyubey's system cannot be escaped until Madoka. This is a real challenge for spin-offs, and I'll get into this as I start talking about them. And there are good manga spin-offs. Just not many. At least of the ones I looked at. The challenge is, how do you tell a story in a world in which your characters are monsters being exploited by a horrible system that cannot be overthrown? It's really hard as a writer to navigate that without either cheating and overthrowing the system, or depicting your characters as being monsters and deserving it, or depicting the system as being not all that bad actually. All of which are mistakes. All right, those of you who are afraid of manga spoilers, this is your chance to flee. The rest of you enjoy an AMV. This, by the way, is the single most successful attempt to depict a timeline that wasn't in the show, in my opinion. Note, by the way, that that followed all three of the rules I talked about. All right, so... okay, so let's talk about some of the manga. I'm going to cover three of them, because those are the three I read from my book, because those were the three that were readily available at the time I started my book. Poila Magi Kazumi Magica. Who here has read it? Yeah, that's about what it deserves. It tries-ish. But, well, I mean, look at her. You can already tell they've missed the point. If Madoka Magica is about criticizing Moe, yeah, great job missing the bus on that one, guys. What this comic does is it literalizes this idea I've been talking about that the magical girls are and always have been witches. Because, although we don't know this until fairly late in the comic, Kazumi is a witch, not a magical girl. But a group of other magical girls that she recruited back when she was a magical girl combine their powers and manage to turn the witch not back into a human, but into a human shape that thinks it's a human. And you get other stuff, like the first villain, their power as a magical girl is to turn ordinary women into pseudo-witches. And the main magical girl team themselves, the Pleiades, are violent, treacherous liars and killers. They're kind of terrible. Basically, what this did is exactly what I was warning about, where it took the fact that the characters are all monsters and made them act like it. They're all terrible. And it does absolutely nothing to redeem the idea of the witch. I think the biggest mistake in the entire comic is that it shows that the witches have, like, in Madoka, it's kind of ambiguous as to whether witches are actually sentient beings or not. Do they know what's going on around them, or are they just violently lashing out at everything and everyone? Certainly they don't retain the personality of the original magical girl. They're influenced by it, as we see when Sayaka becomes Octavia, but the mere fact that Octavia is willing to try to murder Madoka and, Kyoko shows that there's very little, if any, of Sayaka left. It's all of her negative impulses, but none of her. Here, it's very different. Here, the witches can communicate. Which means it's going even further. It's, instead of the difference between a magical girl and a witch being that the magical girl is the horror the witch is the horror of being a magical girl. It's the pain, the despair, the suffering, and the lashing out with your power in response. Here, the only real difference between the magical girls and the witches is that the magical girls are cute and the witches are ugly. So, when your basement-dwelling otaku nerd can fap to it, it's good. And when they can't, it's bad. It also commits, in my opinion, the worst of all crimes. It suggests that there is hope to be found within Kyubei's system. It suggests the ending to it basically, because they can't overthrow Kyubei's system because that's Madoka's job. So instead, what happens in the end is the implication that these characters are going to find a way to, maintain being magical girls and fighting witches and protecting people and being good guys, and they're not going to suffer the consequences of that because... So basically, don't try to change the system, don't try to break free, and it's totally okay for girls to have power as long as they're cute while they're doing it. Otherwise, it's horrible and they're monsters. And actually, they're monsters the whole time anyway, but they're cute, so we don't mind. Yeah, not a good manga. Do not recommend. The next one I'm going to cover is better. Mostly, this one just has a really janky art style. It's really weird looking. But it's almost like, you know how people made that Manga series by using off-model shots from the show? It's almost like the person thought that was what the show was supposed to look like. It's not bad art, it's just weird.
I'm glad it got vetoed.
I'm sorry?
I'm glad it got vetoed.
But what Oriko mostly focuses on is that third tenet, is that fact that we cannot break free. And so its solution to the problem is, okay, if there's no way to do this that isn't a tragedy, let's do a tragedy. Let's do a classical tragedy. So it introduces a magical girl named Oriko. And Oriko's power is that she can see the future. And specifically what she sees is witch form Madoka annihilating all existence. She does not see the context of that. So she believes that Madoka is going to become a magical girl and destroy the world. So like Homura, she is determined to stop Madoka from making a contract. Her planned method of doing this is to kill Madoka. Homura is not a fan of this idea. However, that's not where the comic starts. That's halfway through the comic. The first chunk of the comic involves a little girl named Yuma, who is homeless, and Kyoko finds her and takes her in. And so our first tragedy is Yuma, who was abused and ran away, feels worthless and useless. And she wants to do something to help Kyoko. Kyoko has just come from having her entire family commit suicide, or her father commit murder-suicide, more accurately, and thus doesn't want anyone becoming a magical girl for someone else's sake. So Kyoko is trying to stop Yuma from becoming a magical girl. Yuma wants to become a magical girl to help Kyoko and thinks that Kyoko doesn't want her to become a magical girl because Kyoko thinks Yuma is worthless. So we've got that tragedy. Madoka ends up screwing over everything because basically what happens is that Oriko's protector, Kirika, is on the verge of becoming a witch, so they deliberately have her become a witch at Madoka's school in the hopes of killing Madoka. And then Homura and Sayaka, who are magical girls in this timeline, and Mami, organize like protection to get all the students out safely. Madoka decides she's going to go help fight the witch, even though she's a normal girl, because Madoka just wants to help. This results in so many people getting killed. Basically, this is classical tragedy. In classical tragedy, the hero has a tragic flaw. They're absolutely great people, but there's some little thing wrong that causes them to create a disaster. And everything just turns to crap around them, and that's the tragedy. As time went on, what more and more began happening is that it's not even that there's something wrong with them, it's that there's something right with them. It's just right at the wrong time in the wrong place and creates a disaster. And that's what's going on with all of these characters. They all have these good impulses to protect people, to help, but they clash in ways that create an absolute disaster. All of the magical girls here are good. All of them are trying to help. All of them are trying to save the world or save people they care about or protect the ones they love. And in the end, it all falls apart. And in the end, it ends with the destruction of this world because Homura turns back the timeline. And every time Homura does that, she's destroying the world and replacing it with a new one. It's little mini Madokas. Now, there is one scene at the end which consists of Oriko meeting her friend Kirika. and them bonding. And it's a really sweet scene. And the Poema refers to that scene as a vision. And as, oh, they're meeting in the afterlife, or, that kind of thing. That she's seeing the future, or in their new timeline they'll meet and be friends, or one of those things. I actually don't think it is. I think it's actually supposed to be a flashback to how they originally met. Which means, no, there's no escaping the tragedy. By putting at the end, what this is really implying is that the same crap happened in the next timeline, we just didn't notice because we were busy looking at other characters. Now on to the manga I actually like. Orca was okay, it was just depressing. Probably.
Okay, that's a little bit.
Yeah. Well, that's the great thing about Apocalypse. Apocalypses are awesome. They make the world so much better. So, the different story. This is really about Mami and Kyoko. And it's a great story about Mami and Kyoko. The series hints that Mami and Kyoko have a history. Specifically, the fact that Mami refers to a magical girl who wished for someone else's benefit and it became a disaster. And then the minute Mami dies, we introduce a magical girl who wished for someone else and became a disaster. Who comes from the next town over. And the audio drama is played with this by actually having Kyoko be Mami's apprentice. And that's what this comic does as well. It's very much an exploration. It opens with Mami feeling isolated by her work as a magical girl. She can't hang out with the other girls after school. She no longer has a family. She feels very lonely and alone. And then she meets a brand new magical girl. I should also note that other magical girls don't like Mami because she keeps killing familiars before they become witch seeds. Which, just ruins it for everybody. So she teams up with Kyoko and she starts teaching Kyoko, and for a while they work together and they have fun together, and Kyoko adopts the same philosophy of fighting, to protect people, and they get to be heroes together, and it's awesome. And then Kyoko reveals what she does to her father, and he accuses her of witchcraft, and yeah. Kyoko has a really bad day. And after that, Kyoko decides that the problem was that the other magical girls were right and Mami was wrong. Magical girls should just be in it for themselves. And that's where we start getting into the unfairness of the system, because the different story is very much an exploration of that second tenet I talked about. The isolation of magical girls is not an accident. It is a deliberate element of this system introduced by the incubators. Magical girls cannot form teams. In this comic, it points out one of the two reasons. Explicitly, Kyubei says, when Sayaka becomes a witch in this timeline, Mami is still alive, and Kyubei tells her, this is your fault. And she asks how, and it's, because you were forming magical girl teams, which meant there were too many magical girls in one area, which meant there weren't enough witch seeds to go around. So of course the weakest magical girl became a witch. The other way in which teams are impossible is the fact that they drop a single witch's seed. Grief seed. I keep calling them witch's seeds because they are, but yeah, grief seed. Thank you. And what's interesting, you know why? Because witches kiss. That's why I keep calling them witch's seeds. What happens is, if you form a team, only one person gets a grief seed. It might at most have two uses, which means you've just had multiple magical girls spending magical energy for the benefit of one magical. That's going to cause infighting. That's going to tear teams apart. So between those two factors, in Kyubei's system, magical girls cannot form teams. That's one of the things Madoka fixes. You'll notice Wraiths drop lots of little cubes. Makes it a lot easier to share the benefits of hunting one. The other thing this explores very heavily is, okay, so if magical girls being isolated is a feature of the system, we can explore survivor guilt, which both Mami and Kyoko suffer from very heavily. They both suffer from this problem that everyone they love is dead and they feel like it's their fault. For Mami, it's because she wished to save her own life when she could have wished to save her entire family. For Kyoko, it's because her father murdered the whole family after discovering about her wish. But of course, it's not their faults. You know, Mami was in a desperate situation and was offered a chance to survive, and she took it. She was not in a position where she had time to figure out what the limitations on the wish were, and, well, can I ask for this, and so on and so forth. She was dying and she wanted to live. There is no shame in that. Kyoko didn't do anything wrong. Her dad was an ass.
Got one offended father over here.
Huh?
We've got one offended father over here.
Sorry, man. You know, next time, don't murder your entire family.
Help! I just wanted to help, Dad.
All right. So, how are we doing on time? We are doing great on time. I'm going to move on to the next segment. At first there won't be, but this segment is going to have a lot of Rebellion spoilers, if that is something you're worried about, because this is the Homura segment. I apologize for the quality of this. This file has gotten really hard to find, and I don't know where my original copy of it is. All right. So let's talk about Homura and Faust in the series. Because, as I'm sure most of you know, the series is littered with references to Faust. Graffiti artists in Madoka's hometown appear to be really fond of 19th century German literature. So, at the core of Faust, and I'm particularly going to be drawing on Goethe's version, which is another name I'm mispronouncing, Faust's wish is essentially a wish to turn back time. He is an old man who is a renowned scholar, very wise, very learned, but he's got a crush on the local girl who's like 50 years younger than him, and he feels like he's wasted his life. He feels like he wasted it with books and study when he could have been out living. And so this cute little animal comes to him and then transforms into Mephistopheles and offers him a chance to make a wish to go back in time, or not go back in time exactly, but to be young again and live his life over again. Which is pretty close to going back in time. However, there is a condition. If he ever becomes so happy that he wishes for time to stop so that this perfect moment can last forever, he immediately dies and goes to hell. Yeah, there's a lot of Faust in Madoka. Or more accurately, there's a lot of Faust in Homura. Now, there's the girl he has a crush on, Gretchen. Marguerite, but Gretchen for short. Not entirely clear on how that works, but okay. Is this like lovely, saintly, sweet, kind girl, but due to all the crap that comes into her life, due to Faust starting, coming into her life, because, well, Faust is a wise man who has made a pact with the devil. He's a witch. And Gretchen gets persecuted as a result of consorting with him, and basically the first part of Faust ends with Gretchen in a cell, in a prison, within which she has created her own world, and has no understanding of what's going on around her anymore. Yeah. Hello, Witch's Labyrinth. So we've got Homura. And here's where things get really interesting, because Homura is mentioned in the first episode to be from a Christian educational background, at least. If not a Christian herself, she has at least been going to a Christian school. Which means she's been exposed to a lot of Christian thought and a lot of Christian ideas. And the story of Faust is a very Christian story. I mean, it's, the temptation by the devil and the wishing for things and, corruption and so on and so forth. But the thing is, Madoka the series is not Christian. It's Buddhist Faust. Because while Madoka certainly sounds like Gretchen, what happens in the end of Faust is that he eventually hits the point where he wishes that a moment would last forever, because after having a ton of adventures, including actual time travel and going back and making out with Helen of Troy, it's a weird book. Faust helps an elderly couple and feels so good about himself that the rules of the wish are met and he dies. But he doesn't go directly to hell, because his perfect moment that was going to last forever was him being nice to someone and him being charitable, and that's, a virtue. So instead he goes to judgment. And Gretchen, who is long dead at this point, gets the Virgin Mary to intercede on his behalf, and everything's great. That's not what happens in Madoka. What happens in Madoka, going by the Faust rules, is Gretchen makes her own pact with the devil to basically steal all of his power and revise the universe so that she can help all these people.
Sorry, what's the section of Christian?
I'm sorry?
What is the section of Christian background?
What is who?
Homura, in a Christian background?
In the first episode, she says that she transferred in from a Christian school. So, Madoka isn't Gretchen. Madoka is the Bodhisattva Canon. Canon, or a Guanyin in China, was a little girl, or young girl, around the same age as Madoka, who saw all the suffering in the universe and was on the verge of becoming enlightened and escaping to nirvana, but decided that instead she would basically stand there holding the door open, taking on the karmic burdens of others so that they can pass on instead. And when everyone has made it, when everyone has escaped their karmic burdens with her help, then she'll move on and, shut the door on the universe as the last one to leave. So what she does is step in and take the place of the Virgin Mary, which the two are very similar in figures, Canon and Mary, and they've been compared a lot to the point that when Christianity was illegal in Japan, there was an underground sect that worshipped Canon, but really they were Christian, and they would just tell people their Mary statues were statues of Canon. So what we've got here basically is this Buddhist version of Faust. And Homura, a lot of the problems Homura has comes from her having a worldview where there's good and bad and right and wrong. And Madoka kind of steps in and says, nope, sweep away everything and start over. We're gonna, all of this is the problem. You can't separate it out. This, as we go on, will become more of a problem for Homura. So, instead of Faust references, Rebellion has Nietzsche references and Paradise Lost references. So let's talk a little bit about Paradise Lost, and let's talk a little bit about Paradise Lost's genre, which is the classical epic. Now, the way classical epic works, there's basically two ways of looking at genre. You can look at a genre cladistically, which is my preference, which is where a genre is a bunch of works inspired by a particular set of sources. So for the epic, that would be the works of Homer. And basically, everything that's like, oh man, that Homer is awesome, I'm gonna try to do something like that, that's an epic. The other way you could do it is saying, okay, here are the things this genre does, and so any work that does these things is part of the genre. And looking at epics that way, what you get is a vast scope. Nations battling or cosmic orders being rewritten. Yeah, Rebellion's got that. An epic hero, a larger-than-life figure who has, great, powerful passions and strides across the world, causing enormous change, and often has some kind of supernatural ability or assistance from outside. Yeah, okay, Homura's that. You've got elevated discourse. In written epics, it's a very high kind of a language. Paradise Lost in particular is ridiculously hard to read because Milton decided English grammar is for losers. I'll follow the rules of Latin grammar instead. In Rebellion, what it does instead, its variant of elevated discourse is semiotic density. Every shot of Rebellion is incredibly crowded with meaningful images. And every one of those images has about 70 different meanings. In particular, there's a run from about where Homura starts to become a witch to when she grabs Madoka that you could spend months going through that and just pulling out all the different symbols in it and all the different things that they could mean and interpreting them in different ways. And I'll actually I've got a whole slide dedicated to about 3 seconds of it coming up. It's got that. Another common feature is what's called in medias res, which is that it starts in the middle. It starts with a situation already ongoing that the reader viewer doesn't know anything about. They're just flung into it, and then somewhere around the halfway or 3/4 mark, finally you get a flashback or an explanation of what the heck is going on. Yeah, how many people got into Rebellion and were like, what is going on? How did we get to here from where we were? And somewhere around halfway to 3/4, you get an explanation of what's going on, and it makes total sense. Another common feature is you get a massive, massive battle. Paradise Lost is probably the biggest battle ever depicted in an epic. It's the war between Satan's army and heaven in his rebellion. Satan has cannons. But Jesus gets to borrow his dad's car. It's a pretty epic fight. Also, just to make it even more epic, angels and demons cannot actually be killed. They can just be horribly injured and then get back up and heal. So it goes on for a while. We've got the battle against Witch Homura, which is massive and, dare I say, epic. Where you've got all the familiars, Sayaka and Nagisa summoning their witch forms. You've got Homura's awesome army of familiars. It's great. Now, what's interesting about Paradise Lost in particular is that one of the things Milton was doing with it was criticizing the genre of the epic. Because he felt that the virtues depicted in traditional epic heroes were not really that virtuous. They were violent, they were liars, where, the virtues were like strength and cunning. And he was like, well, what that really means is that they were violent liars. Yeah. So what he did was he wrote a story where Satan is diegetically the villain. That is to say, if you were to ask the characters of Paradise Lost who the bad guy is, they'd generally tell you, well, Satan, obviously, he's Satan. But structurally, he's the hero. If you look at it as an epic and you say, okay, who's the hero? Who's the larger-than-life character that we follow and has supernatural powers and changes the world? Well, that's Satan. And it creates a great deal of moral ambiguity. The history of people talking about Paradise Lost is full of everything from Blake famously saying that Milton was actually on the devil's side and didn't know it, because Blake was just like, no, the devil's totally the hero, to people pointing out that, well, okay, but his triumph at the end of the novel is founding an empire that conquers all mankind and then kills us. That's not really a hero. Great deal of moral ambiguity, and hey, guess what? There's kind of a lot of that going on with Homura, too. Structurally, she is the hero. But she's also, destroying the world, tearing God out of her heaven and stealing her power. By the end of it, she's openly saying, yeah, I'm evil. Goes around with big black wings. And finally, Homo Cracker. The other thing that has a ton of imagery in Rebellion is the Nutcracker, which is a story by von Hoffmann, better known for the ballet by Tchaikovsky, which is a very good ballet, but the story is spectacular. If you can find the story, read it. It's really good and really very unlike the ballet, to the point that it's really obvious that it's the story that's inspiring this, not the ballet. The story of the Nutcracker himself, his origins. There was a Princess Pirlipat who was cursed by the Mouse Queen to become a Nutcracker. This ugly creature with massive, powerful jaws, mostly because the Mouse Queen was annoyed that the palace was trying to, exterminate the mice because they were getting in all the food. And this young man was trying to conduct the ritual that would cure her, but he screwed it up, resulting in her being cured, but instead of the curse disappearing, it was passed on to him. And now he's trapped as the Nutcracker. But there's a lot of ambiguity and vagueness because the man who tells the boy how to do this, Drosselmeyer, is also the man who is telling the story. And there's a lot of ambiguity about him and suggestions that he might actually be the real villain. If you've seen Princess Tutu, Drosselmeyer is the character I'm talking about. So there's a lot of implications that really she's a victim. In this case, our Drosselmeyer would be Cube, by the way. So there's a lot of Nutcracker references in Rebellion. Homura is the Nutcracker Witch. That's her official designation as a witch. Her dolls, one of her groups of familiars, the doll-like ones, are called Claras. Clara is the name of the main character of the ballet, The Nutcracker. Her soldier familiars look like the traditional image of the Nutcracker that's used in that story. She has broken jaw, and there are teeth everywhere. The titular Nutcracker, has a broken jaw, which is why, part of what kicks off the story is that the girl gets a Nutcracker as a Christmas present, and breaks it. And then she gets sick, and she kind of fixates on him as like a toy, and he becomes her favorite, and her uncle Drosselmeyer tells her this story to cheer her up, in which he is a character, and the Nutcracker is a character, and so on and so forth. Kyubey is, in addition to Drosselmeyer, probably also the Mouse King, the son of the Mouse Queen, who is the main villain, and probably also allied with Drosselmeyer. And finally, there are actual fragments of the text of the story scattered around, just like Faust was scattered around in the series.
One really quick thing. I've actually heard about the series before, and one thing that I was thinking of is that over the course of the last period of the movie, I actually sort of thought it was translating from the book to the ballet, as signified by the clothes scene and the ballet curve dancing in that thing, and how
That's an interesting point.
it's how one interpretation of the story is the book, and that's how she sees herself. But on the other hand, you can also see it as the ballet interpretation. Yeah, which, maybe I can talk to you about that later.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, that's fine. That's really interesting, and I like that. That's a really good point. So one of the things I talk about in my book, the last 7 chapters of the book are all rebellion against something. And the movie is called Rebellion. Who is rebelling against what? And I give 7 different possible answers. One of them is a rebellion against Homura, by Homura. Homura spends the entire first act of the movie battling against the mysterious figure who has created this world where the magical girls are brought together and happy, which, guess what? That's Homura. She's fighting herself for the entire first act. And we find out why when we see her become a witch. We see the chairs that have been shown in the first 2 movies, those 2 white chairs, and Homura and Madoka being together on them and really cute. Except this time, Madoka stands up, falls over sideways, and becomes a pink smear. She becomes an abstraction. She goes from being a person to being the concept of hope. Homura is realizing that she failed in her quest to save Madoka. Madoka no longer exists in this world. It is the worst thing that could possibly happen from Homura's perspective. And so her transformation into witch is full of moments in which she failed to save Madoka. Most prominently, the moment in which she killed Madoka in that one timeline to prevent her from becoming a witch. And we see Homura with the gun to Madoka, and then it becomes Homura shooting herself. Because Homura, remember that survivor guilt I talked about in regards to the comics? Homura blames herself. Homura created the circumstances which allowed Madoka to make that wish, that destroyed Madoka from Homura's perspective. So we get this beautiful shot of original recipe Homura standing in looming judgment over the failure that is current day Homura. Homura hates herself. She despises herself. All of this Nutcracker imagery is a way of torturing herself with, the curse she's brought onto herself with her failure. The Nutcracker has a broken jaw. It's an image of uselessness. And so we get the final act of the movie. She says, I am evil. Well, what does the sentence, I am evil, mean, except I deserve to be punished? And she's discovered a new way to do it. Betraying her allies, making them hate her. She tried to do it. She tried to get them to kill her as a witch, and they refused. So what's she gonna do now? She's gonna make them hate her, so that next time, they have no qualms about killing her. She's going to be the devil of their world, and they will have no choice but to destroy her as she feels she deserves. So a lot of people have asked, what is Homura? Is Homura the villain? Is Homura a victim? Is Homura a hero? The answer is yes. Homura is the villain of rebellion. Homura is that villain's victim. Homura is the hero fighting that villain. She is all three of those things at once because her witch's barrier has expanded to encompass the entire universe, and she is, therefore, the entire story now. Are they going to make a sequel? Well, they're making a lot of money, so probably. Will that sequel explore this? I really hope so. I would really love to see, it coming down to Homura. Basically, Homura is the ultimate evil of this world, the controller of all the witches. The magical girls come after her, and Madoka is like, well, maybe we should just talk to her. I believe, yes. One final image, a reminder. Kyubey, and as I said, I explore this more in the book. Kyubey is a self-insert for Orobochi. He's still watching. Homura has battered and broken and beaten him. But remember, Madoka did that before. And Kyubey came back and created the circumstances in rebellion. Moe isn't dead. Watch out. Because I like to give homework. That's the front cover of my book, by the way. Some further readings, The Very Soil by me. If you're interested in Paradise Lost, I strongly recommend The Riverside Milton by Roy Flanagan. It's ridiculously expensive, but it provides, it's everything Milton ever wrote heavily annotated, which is absolutely vital with Paradise Lost. Bayard Taylor has done a translation of Faust that actually has the weird second part, which most English translations don't. Nutcracker and the Mouse King by E.T.A. Hoffman. An article by Sherilyn Orbach called Busty Batlin Babes from a book called Gender and Power in the Japanese Visual Field. Has some really good stuff on the origins of magical girls and the development of the genre and transformation sequences. And finally, Beautiful Fighting Girl by Saito Tamaki is, in my opinion, an absolute must-read if you're interested in magical girls, women in anime in general, and like otaku culture and the development of moe. Rest of this con, at 12:30, I'm doing postmodernism and anime in the Fens, which is a new room in the Sheridan. Tonight, I'm doing Break the World's Shell, Anime Apocalypse and Revolution at 8:30 in room 202. Tomorrow at 10 in the morning, I'm doing Tengen Toppa Evangelion, Aim for the Top in room 206. I'm doing Reading Too Much into the Slayers at 9 p.m. in the Public Garden, which I have no clue where that is. And Sunday, I'm doing Big Eyes Small Mouth from 1 to 2:30 in room 208. I blog at jedablue.com. Updates are daily. I'm currently engaged in a weekly project that will take me approximately a decade, where I'm doing a iconography of the entire DC animated universe, one episode at a time. Yeah, so that's it. Any questions? Thank you.